وقت معدود ولا أجل ممدود أما بعد فقد قال الله الحكيم في محكم كتابه الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وإذ أخذ ربك من بني آدم من ظهورهم ذريتهم وأشهدهم على أنفسهم قال ألست بربكم قالوا بلى شهدنا أن تقولوا يوم القيامة إنا كنا عن هذا غافلين أو تقولوا إنما أشرك آباؤنا من قبل وكنا ذرية من بعدهم أفتهلكنا بما فعل المبطلون صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. For the love of our beloved Prophet and his beloved progeny, a second loud salawat. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجهم. For the hastening in the return of our beloved 12th Imam, a third final loud salawat. Last night we began our discussion on the topic of the 7 deadly vices, and we mentioned that any of these vices that make their way into the life of a human being have the potential to ruin an otherwise successful life. If a human being is successful in his career, if he's successful in his relationships, the moment mira makes its way into his life, the moment greed makes its way into his life, the moment anger and ujb and takabbur make its way into his life, this life of his can fundamentally be overshadowed and overtaken by this vice that has now seeped into his life. And that is why we mentioned that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the opportunity for 50 years, 60 years, 100 years maybe, for me to work hard to incorporate within myself honorable moral traits. Those traits that in Islam, the term makarimul akhlaq is used for them. This is why we come across this beautiful dua from the 4th Imam, dua number 20 of Sahifatul Sajjadiyya, called dua makarimul akhlaq, in which the Imam, he introduces these honorable moral traits and then encourages us to gain them and to incorporate them within ourselves. And we said we have this opportunity until that moment of death comes. When the moment of death comes, it is then me and who I am and eternity. Once that call comes, once Malikul Maut is approaching me, as the Quran says, that moment will never be delayed. Once that moment comes, whatever version of myself I have built, that is the version of myself that I will be living with for eternity. And we said one of the important things to contemplate is this concept of eternity. It is truly mind-boggling. It really puts things into perspective for the human being, that I'm going to live for 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years, for eternity, based off of who I am right now. Therefore, I don't have forever to begin incorporating these proper akhlaq in my life. And we mentioned that the 6th Imam said you have to gauge yourself. Imtahinu anfusakum. If you find these makarimul akhlaq within yourself, then praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He's blessed you. If you don't find these makarimul akhlaq inside of yourself, warghabu ilayha. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and start working in that direction. Yes? Therefore, much of Islam is about me waking up to this reality. And if I don't wake up to this reality, then it becomes a means of regret for me. This is roughly where we ended our discussion. We mentioned that this moment where I want to incorporate these proper akhlaq and traits inside of me, many times it will feel like a war that is taking place, a battle, which is why the Prophet referred to this as the greater jihad and referred to the military expedition as the minor jihad or the minor struggle. He said the greatest struggle that a human being can go through is the struggle that he does against his own self that lies between jambay, between his two sides. This is where we ended our discussion yesterday. Tonight, inshallah, we'll continue the discussion, speaking a little bit more about our fitra as well as the steps I have to take to incorporate makarimul akhlaq within myself. In order to do so, we'll answer, inshallah, the following questions. Number one, when we talk about this concept of fitra, what exactly are we referring to? And how can I know if my fitra is well and alive or if my fitra is very deeply populated or polluted rather and deeply buried under sin? Number two, what is this world that the Quran refers to as alamul dhar, or the narrations refer to as alamul dhar, the world of particles? And what is this conversation that the Quran references in Surah Al-A'raf, that before we came to this world, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had a conversation with us and He gave us self-awareness and the awareness of His presence and that He is our Lord. Number three, what are the three steps I have to take when I want to incorporate makarimul akhlaq in my day-to-day life? Number four, is the purpose of my creation and the final end goal of Islam for me to become a person who is a means of blessings to the people around me and to make the world a better place, as we say? Or is the purpose that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has in mind for my life much deeper than this? In fact. Number five, why is it that you find between both schools of thought in Islam agreed upon beyond the shadow of a doubt that the greatest sin is the sin of shirk, whereas many times we find a person who is mushrik, he might be a means of benefit for society in some ways, and we find a person who's not mushrik might be a means of problems for society? Why is it this sin is considered the biggest sin in all of Islam? Number six, when I'm raised on the day of judgment, what are the first questions that I will be asked? And number seven, and finally, if I leave this world in a state of spiritual purification, leave this world in a pure manner, will the moments of my death be a means of pain and difficulty, or will the moments of my death be some of the most pleasurable moments that I will experience? And who joins me in those final moments of my life? Tonight, inshallah, we'll delve into these 7 questions with a loud salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Let us begin from here. This fitra that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you to balance this war that you're going into. This war that you're going into, there are forces on the good side, there are forces on the evil side. On the good side, we said one of those forces is your fitra. Alongside your fitra, there is also the angels of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They pray for you, they pull you, they whisper good things into your ears. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has designated them to balance and level the playing field, to give you a better opportunity to make the right decision. But maybe the most important force on the good side is what Quran and Hadith refer to as my fitra. What is this fitra? And how did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give this fitra to us? Fitra refers to that deep foundation of my existence, the essence in my existence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, I am going to give to you an understanding, a knowledge, whatever wording you want to use to speak of this. A knowledge and an understanding, an inclination that you will always be moving in the right direction, that will always pull you towards me and anything that I want from you. Sure, you'll live in society, there's a lot of temptations, there's a lot of bad things that are presented as good things. At the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and I with fitrah. He blessed us with that deep inclination that shows me right from wrong, that deep inclination that reminds me that I have a creator. Even when that gets very confusing, even when it gets lost in the busyness of life, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted me with this fitrah. This fitrah always pulls me in the right direction. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا. This fitrah I've placed within the human being. No one can take this fitrah away from the human being. He will always have this. What can happen to the fitrah, and what happens to the fitrah of a lot of people, is that it can become polluted. Your fitra, my fitra can very much become polluted. It can very much get buried under the piles of sins that we commit. Even when it's buried at the very bottom, it's still there. It still exists. So every now and then, if someone comes and polishes it, yes, it's still, there's some hope left there. Yes, that fitra never fully disappears. It can get very polluted. It can get buried under many things, but it's still there at the end of the day. Yes, but for you and I, we have to make sure that our fitra doesn't get this polluted. And we had a great scholar, a great teacher, and a mentor of ours in Qom. He used to say this line very, very frequently. He said, if you want to know if your fitra is well and alive or if your fitra has become very polluted. In another way, if I want to know if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has left me to myself or not. You know, sometimes a human being can sin so much that at one point Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does what? Leaves him to himself. That's also part of his mercy in a different way. But he says this one he has to learn a hard way. It leaves him to himself. He said, if you want to know if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has left you to yourself or not, which is a scary idea, he said there's one way to know. That one way is that when this person disobeys Allah, when he sins, is there some guilt at least that comes into his heart or not? Is there something deep down that sits some discomfort for him, some unease for him? When he sins, he thinks to himself, I'm not supposed to be doing this. If he has that feeling, he still has not left him to himself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still has an eye on him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is still watching out for him. If he reaches a point where he sins and it's like another Tuesday, he doesn't care. It's just any other day. It's not a big deal. In fact, when I sin, life feels even better. Actually, it's pleasurable. I enjoy life. It's not even a big deal. He used to say, this is a person who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has now what? Left to himself and left to his own senses. Let him go at life on his own. So this fitrah is always there. I have to make sure that it doesn't end up being polluted. This is the most important thing for me. Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran referenced an important conversation. He said that before we brought you into this world, there was another world, the narrations tell us, called Alamul Dharr, the world of particles. What is this Alamul Dharr? A world in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looked in the loins of Adam and brought out from the loins of Adam his children. Many of them are not born yet, yes? But he brought them out as what the narrations seem to point as particles. What are these particles and in what shape and form we don't fully understand. He brought them out as particles. The Quran says we gave mankind and every child of Adam 2 pieces of information. We said number 1, وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ. First of all, we gave them self-awareness, knowledge of themselves. وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ. Number 1. Number 2, he asked them, أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ. Am I not your Lord and Creator and Nurturer? The Quran makes the promise unequivocally that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has had this conversation with all of the children of Adam. Gave them self-awareness, yes? Gave them the awareness that they have a creator, a nurturer, a Rabb, a Lord, some greater power in this world. Self-awareness, every single human being has self-awareness, yes? This is why when you're in pain, you know you're in pain, yes? When you're happy, you know you're happy. When you're sad, you know you're sad. Every single human being, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted them self-awareness. The only person I've seen who doesn't have self-awareness is the one who's been fasting for 10 hours. He still doesn't brush his teeth when he comes to the masjid. This one, he doesn't have any self-awareness. Yani everyone else has awareness of him and his situation, but he doesn't have any self-awareness of his own situation. Outside of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave self-awareness to all of us. Then he said, I told all of you and had this conversation with all of you that I am your Lord. But the problem is, you and I, when we sit back and think, we don't remember this conversation. We don't remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala having us all standing there and saying, I am your Lord. Do you accept? And the Quran says we all responded in the affirmative. قَالُوا بَلَى. We said yes. So scholars like Allama Tabatabai and others, they came forward and said what? They said this conversation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referencing in the verses of the Quran is not a literal conversation that took place. This conversation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referencing is a representation of your fitra. The fitra that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave you is always saying, Bala, I know I have a creator. Your fitra is always pointing you towards who? Towards a creator. He said this conversation is a metaphorical conversation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, I place this deeply within you. No matter where you go, you will always have this with you. It's not a literal conversation that took place before this world began. That's how the Quran is telling us. No, it is a conversation that represents the fitrah that you carry with yourself even right now. Why? Because the verse of the Quran says, أَن تَقُولُوا يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ إِنَّا كُنَّا عَنْ هَذَا غَافِلِينَ. We're having this conversation with you so you don't come later on the day of judgment and say, I wasn't aware of this. But I don't remember this conversation. So Allama Tabatabai says, no, this is your fitrah. This is that deep inclination that you have within you. It always points you towards who? Points you towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has balanced and leveled the playing field. I now want to incorporate these makarimul akhlaq within myself. 3 steps I have to take before I begin with incorporating these akhlaq. Aloud salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The first of those is this. First and foremost, I have to have a moment of awareness. I have to wake up. I have to wake up before it's too late. The first Imam, Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, he has a beautiful line. He says, An-nas niyamun. People are asleep. They're snoozing. And he's referring to me, huh? An-nas niyamun. They're asleep. You know when they wake up? إِذَا مَاتُوا إِنْتَبَهُوا. When they die is when they wake up. The problem with that waking up is it's too late. It's too late to wake up when you're already dealing with a situation. You have to wake up to the reality of things before that thing becomes your reality. One more time. You have to, in life, wake up to the reality of things before those things become your reality. This applies when it comes to our akhirah. It applies even in this world, yes? If everybody realizes the morning of the test that the test is a real thing. Everybody understands this, yes? Everybody understands the morning of the interview that the interview is a real thing. Everyone understands this. You're mature if you wake up to this before you get to that point. Everyone, when they have a wife, a husband, 2 children, so on and so forth, knows and realizes at that point that, you know what, I need to have a good job to be able to pay the bills. At that point, everyone realizes. But the issue is you have to wake up to that way before. Much of the important decisions that you will make in life, I'm saying this for the youngsters, yes? Much of the important decisions that you make in life, you have to have the maturity to understand that situation before you get to that situation. Of course, when you get to the situation, everyone understands it. Then it's a reality in front of your eyes. Most of the decisions that you will make that will decide whether you become successful in your life or not are decisions you make before the age of 30. Most of them is about, do you have an awareness before you get to that point? So he has to decide for his spouse, probably before the age of 30 he's going to make this decision. But this decision he's going to make it for the next 60 years, it's going to impact his life. His career, a lot of decisions he's going to make in his 20s. But this before he gets to that point. Similarly, the first Imam said, before I get to something, I have to have the awareness that it is coming. This is number 1, having a moment of awareness. Number 2, the second step, before incorporating these makarimul akhlaq, is I have to realize my own weakness and I have to bring along with me someone who's much more powerful. And that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every time you want to incorporate something positive in yourself, immediately show your weakness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Immediately tell Allah, oh Allah, I don't know how to do this. I'm weak here. I need your help to do this. Constantly go back to Him. Constantly ask Him for help. Because the reality is you can't go at this on your own. The Prophet of Allah, Muhammadin al-Mustafa, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, he had a beautiful line, beautiful dua. And Shia and Sunni have narrated this dua with slightly different wording. Whenever the topic of tazkiyah used to come up, spiritual purification, he used to raise his hands in dua. Say, Allahumma ati nafsi taqwaha. Oh Allah, you be the one to give taqwa to my soul. Wa zakkiha, purify my soul. فَأَنْتَ خَيْرُ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. No one can purify my soul like you. أَنْتَ وَلِيُّهَا وَمَوْلَاهَا. You're the one who has to take my affairs into His own hands. I can't do this. And then he would recite this dua that we recite after many of our wajib prayers. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min nafsin la tashba' wa min qalbin la yakhsha'. And the dua continues. Oh Allah, I'm weak. I can't do this on my own. So step number 2, I have to turn to Him. I have to constantly ask Him for help. Yes. Let's move on to step number 3. Step number 3 is that I have to constantly put myself in a situation where I have constant reminders reminding me that incorporating these akhlaq is my number 1 priority in life. I can't sit there one day and say, you know what, this makarim al-akhlaq is very important. MashaAllah, let me move on with my life. That's not how it works. I need to place myself in a situation where I have constant reminder. Constant reminder. Why? Because shaitan is very good at keeping us busy and ghafil. This is what shaitan has been doing for a very long time. He knows exactly how to keep the human being busy. So he doesn't have an opportunity to work on himself. Yes? That's why the 4th Imam, Al-Imam As-Sajjad, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The 4th Imam in Dua Makarim al-Akhlaq, what does he say? He says, Oh Allah, wakfini ma yashghaluni al-ihtimamu bihi. Oh Allah, make sure I don't get busy with life so much that when it comes to my spiritual purification, I kick it down the road. Make sure I don't become that person who his 9 to 5 is his whole world. His fame is his whole world. Her beauty is her whole world. Her recognition is her whole world. I don't want to be that person. I want to be the one who doesn't miss out on the most important thing in life. Shaitan, brothers and sisters, and this is scary even when I'm saying this, shaitan is very good at keeping us ghafil. You know, a question I get very, very often is this. Shaykh, you say if someone repents, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive their blessings in a split second. Yes? Say, yeah, that's the promise of the Quran. So I get this question often. People say, well, Shaykh, that seems too easy. Everyone's just going to repent and have their sins forgiven. No, you're underestimating shaitan. Sure, anybody who comes and asks for forgiveness, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive his sins. No doubt about it. But you think shaitan is just going to sit there and let people come and ask for forgiveness? Shaitan knows how to keep people busy. Shaitan knows how to keep you and I busy. Otherwise, there would be no hellfire. How much easier could have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made tawbah? Tawbah is the easiest possible thing it can be. And still there are many people leave this world with sins. So then what's happening here? You said it was so easy. Every time I asking for forgiveness, Allah's going to forgive me? Yes. But who said you'll come and ask for forgiveness? That's the issue. Shaitan can keep you ghafil for years. The same shaitan who got you to commit that sin to begin with can keep you busy so that you avoid tawbah for the rest of your life. This is what shaitan does. He's very good at what he does. And he's only been doing it for thousands of years. Yes? Shaitan can keep us busy. The same shaitan who told you commit this sin, he says, yeah, but not now. It's okay. Do tawbah, no problem, but not now. You keep you busy. So the fourth Imam prays to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oh Allah, make sure that I don't get busy with life and forget about the most important thing. Then he continues, وَاسْتَعْمِلْنِي بِمَا تَسْأَلُنِي قَدًا عَنْهُ. Oh Allah, make sure you make it such that I'm spending most of my life on the things that you're actually going to ask me about tomorrow. What are the things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to ask me about tomorrow? The narration says on the day of judgment, the servant, he cannot walk one step. لا تزول قدم عبد مؤمن. He can't take one step. حتى يسأل عن أربع. Unless that he's asked of four things. Number one, في جسده فيما أبلاه. That young, strong body that you had, what did you use it for? What did you invest your life in? وفي عمره فيما أفناه. The rest of your life, what were you doing with your time? Number three, وَفِي مَالِهِ, his wealth. Two things though. How did you get it? How did you spend it? These are the questions they ask me. And then the narration says the number four is what? وَأَنْ حُبِّنَا أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ. And from our love, which direction did you have in life? Our direction or the direction of the enemies of Allah? These are the things that they ask me about. The Imam says, oh Allah, make sure these are the things I'm investing in. I don't get busy with other things. Then he adds one more line. He says, oh Allah, make sure that during this time, I am investing my time lima khalaqtani la, for that thing that you really created me for. Make sure while I'm here, I am fulfilling the purpose of my creation. So what's the purpose of my creation? If you ask brothers and sisters, the average Muslim, they will give you the wrong answer about this question. A loud salawat, please. If you ask the average Muslim, he will tell you, number one, the purpose of your creation is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you to test you. A test is never the final purpose for anything. You always run a test for another reason. He says the purpose of your creation is for you to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is correct, but this is not the final purpose of my creation. Because out of that worship, something else is going to come. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants that. The final purpose of my creation was my spiritual growth. The final purpose of my creation was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted me to become the most beautiful version of myself possible. That's the purpose of my creation. If you don't understand this, much of the acts of worship in Islam and much of the obligations in Islam will never make sense to you. And this is a misunderstanding a lot of our youth have. If you ask him, what is the end goal of Islam? He says, I want to become a good Muslim so that I do good to others and I make the world a better place. This is what we say, Correct, this is part of Islam, but this is not the main reason why you were created. It's deeper than this. You were not created just so you do good unto others. That's part of Islam. That will happen by extension. But the main purpose for your creation was for you to grow spiritually. Through that spiritual growth, you will also become a means of good for others in their lives as well. You, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is looking at you. Who are you becoming? You want to know a very simple way how this makes sense? I'll give you a very basic example. Why is it in Islam your intention matters? How come when this corporation gives millions of dollars to nonprofits and gets its tax write-off, and then you take $5 from your hard-earned money and you give it to this person who is needy? How come Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the millions of dollars don't count for anything? Because they just wanted the tax write-off. Your $5 though is a really big deal. Why? Isn't that corporation feeding a lot more people? Yeah, they're feeding a lot more people than you. But the purpose of your creation was not just to do good to others. That comes by extension. That's an added bonus. The purpose why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put you in that situation is to see if you grow your generosity. Do you grow your soul, Your spiritual growth is the end all be all for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, if you become a pure spiritual person, you will also, by extension, become a means of good for others as well. There's no doubt about it. Many of the acts of worship in Islam, brothers and sisters, they don't directly impact others in a positive way. Many of them. So I go to Hajj. How am I impacting society in the best possible way? I'm not necessarily. At least not directly. But when you go to Hajj, there's spiritual growth that you're experiencing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put a great reward for it. Let me give you an example that's very tangible. If you're sitting during the nights of Qadr, and somewhere in the midst of these a'mal that are happening, you think to yourself, I severed my relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even though you've repented, you're forgiven, but you know that you didn't do justice to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And a tear leaves your eye. Islam says that tear is worth so much. But did that tear affect society? And did you feed 1,000 people? And did you do this? No. But you grew spiritually. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives a lot of value to this. The fundamental goal behind my creation is whether I grow spiritually or not. Sure, if I do it the right way, I should also become a means of good to others as well. And this is why, brothers and sisters, shirk is the greatest sin in Islam. This person is mushrik. Can he not do some good to other people? Of course he can. But was the purpose of his creation to do good to others? Or was the purpose of his creation for him to grow spiritually? And when he is mushrik, he has denied the basic truth that has been presented to him, that he has a Lord, that he has a creator. He has closed the door to his spiritual growth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this sin is the biggest sin. This other one, he hasn't closed that door. The door to his spiritual growth is open because he has accepted the basic truth that is presented to him, that he has a Lord. So now, if he goes, he backbites. If he sins, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala holds him accountable. But that's not the greatest of sins, because he still has a path to spiritual growth. The one who is mushrik closed that path. Of course, we're speaking of the one who does so knowingly. Yes? So, this becomes the number one goal in my life. I have to always ask myself, am I growing spiritually? Are these characteristics of mine developing or not? That's the most important thing. Otherwise, shaitan can keep me busy with a lot of things. Sheikh Mati can give the most beautiful lectures. He can sit here and say this and say that. If he's not acting on it himself, he can impact a lot of people in a positive way. But if he's not acting on it himself, there's no spiritual growth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks at this, he says, has no value for me. You didn't grow yourself. Your own spiritual growth. If I become a person who spiritually grows himself, two things will happen. Number one, the first thing that happens is that in this world, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes care of my other affairs. So the narration says, the one who fixes his relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will fix his relationship with other people. The one who fixes his relationship with God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take charge of his affairs in this world. This is the benefit in this world if I begin working on myself, yes? But what happens if a spiritually pure individual leaves this world? The moments of death, are they painful moments for him, or are they pleasurable moments for him? Let us sit with the narration of the sixth Imam to understand this point. The sixth Imam was telling his companion, he said, when a believer leaves this world, those moments where he's leaving this world, if he's pure, are the best moments that he experiences. So as they are telling him that now it's time to go, the angel has come to take his soul. Before they take his soul, the narration said, the Prophet comes and sits to his right side. And the Ahlul Bayt come and sit to his left side. And the Prophet turns to him and says, listen, everything that you were worried about, difficulties, in the past, gone. Everything you were looking forward to, it's all waiting for you. All of that is ahead of you. And then the sixth Imam said the Prophet sitting beside him opens up a window for him towards heaven and shows him his place in heaven and says, now with you knowing this is your place in heaven, do you want to stay in this world or do you want to go? And he voluntarily decides to go. How different is this from what we've heard, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes and grabs the soul out of the body, yes, and tries to pull it away in this person? Yes, for some people it is like that. For a pure believer, this is how he leaves the world. The narration says the moment he agrees to this, then the signs of death become apparent on his body. Because now the body, the soul is being removed from it, yes? So the Imam said, then you will see him going pale. Then you will see a little bit of sweat on his foreheads. Then you will see the bodily functions begin to fall apart because the soul is leaving. Then he said they begin to do his ghusl and kafan. Ghusl and kafan we assume is going to be painful moments. The Imam said when they're doing his ghusl and kafan and they begin carrying his body to the graveyard, he is walking ahead of them. He's more present than the people who are carrying his body in his tashir'. And as he's approaching the graveyard, who comes forward? The souls of other believers come forward to welcome him. When he is placed inside the grave, he returns there. When he returns there, that same window that had opened up to him before opens up to him again. And he sees his place in heaven. Of course, he can't go to heaven yet. This is barzakh. Yes, so he can't move there. But he knows where he is headed. And then look at what the narration said. The Imam said, the believer who is pure, the ground that he walks on takes pride that this believer is walking upon me. He takes pride that this believer chose me over other parts of the earth. When he ends up in the grave, the narration says that all of a sudden that window opens, the lights of that window, the convenience of that window fills his grave. And the grave begins to speak to him and says, I remember the time where you used to walk upon me. And when you used to walk upon me, I loved you. لَقَدْ كُنْتُ أُحِبُّكَ, I used to love you. But now something even better has happened. Now your affairs have been allocated to me. You have come, now I'm embracing you. So you will see how well I treat you. And the narration says the grave opens up as far as his eyes can see. This is the one who spiritually purifies himself, leaves this world when he is pure. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us, inshallah, amongst those who leave this world in a state of purification, inshallah.